has like a huge library of charts. Which one do I use that's going to be most effective and most clear? Okay. Then you need to start thinking also about placement and layout. Now, this is usually a difficult step because you'll have limited real estate, right? So, I mean, you can always make the argument and say that, I have unlimited slides, but we don't really have unlimited slides because we never use like 150 or 200 slides. I know some people do, some companies do. I've seen those happen as well. But usually you'll get these kind of requests or from your manager, right? I don't know if you've ever heard this. I've heard this on so many occasions from my managers. They've told me that Instagram, we have to do this in 4 slides. We can't do more than 4 or 5 slides max, right? Because obviously we want to avoid the whole death by PowerPoint thing, right? And even with dashboards, one of the practices that I follow with dashboards is, of course, as a strict rule, as far as usability best practices are concerned, no horizontal scroll in my dashboards ever. It has to, as far as possible, everything should fit on one screen. Sometimes I have vertical scroll, which is fine, but on most occasions I avoid it. I try and fit everything on one screen. And if there's additional information or additional data that I need to showcase, and I put in additional screens and create like a very intuitive navigation so that people can navigate between those screens, right? But real estate will always be limited. What you have on your screen is what you have on your screen. And then you have to fit everything in. Okay. So usually an iterative process, you won't get this right the first time. Even after about 10 years of doing this, having created hundreds of dashboards and maybe thousands of PowerPoint slides, right? I still don't get this right every time the first time, right? It's an iterative process. I have to think about it, but it gets better with experience. And then the last 3 steps are your design steps, right? So design, so choosing your color palette. And then once you have your color palette, that's just half the job done. So within your color palette, that's usually the easy part because your organization will give you a color palette, right? So you'll have your brand colors ready with you. So your organization will stipulate that, these are the 3, 4, or 5 colors that you must use. But then even then, when you have those 3, 4, or 5 colors, how do you combine them correctly, right? And effectively. Okay, so that's another step. And then, of course, there are some simple design principles. There's some simple formatting, simple but very powerful and very effective formatting that can be done. And the last step, of course, and this is not necessarily the last step. This is something that, all of these steps are interchangeable. Okay, so you can kind of, move things around, do one of these before. But context is extremely, extremely important, right? So that's the second one of the second pillars of kind of telling a story. Okay, the first pillar is, of course, generating insights, right? So you should be able to generate insights, and then you should be able to provide context. Okay, so now that's the process. But I've mentioned this term data storytelling, right? So what exactly is data storytelling, right? So it's kind of like a fuzzy concept to a lot of people. When you Google it, what happens is that you get and this has happened with me. So I've gone in, I've Googled data storytelling, and I've read all of these different articles, including on Medium, right? So there's a lot of interesting stuff on Medium. And of course, in general, there's a lot of interesting stuff out there on the internet. I actually get this as a request from a lot of people, so they tell me that, I've kind of read about data storytelling, but what is it exactly? I mean, how do I apply it? Like, can you just, tell me like very, very clearly, is my data, my chart, wherever it is, on a dashboard or, on a PowerPoint, is it telling that story? And if it's not, how do I make it tell a story? So there's actually a couple of very simple techniques that are used for telling a story, and very practical and easily applicable techniques that you can use to tell a story. So I'm going to share a very simple formula with all of you, right? So that's the formula that I use for data storytelling. Now, if you follow this, right, effectively, if you do this or apply this, your data will start telling a story, right? So, and this is not about you telling that story, because we are not going to be speaking. This is not presentation skills, right? So data storytelling is when you design your dashboard or your slides in a manner that your reader or your audience, right, the person who's consuming this, will be able to see that story coming up, right? Will be able to consume it in the form of a story. All right. So, of course, it all starts with a question. Okay, that question is very, very important. It's something that we also start our insight generation process with. One of the best ways of doing it is to be able to ask questions that your data set will be able to answer. Every data set has answers, right? And typical questions are questions like, so what does our overall average look like? What is the total look like? Which product is doing better? Which region is doing better, right? So you've got a whole lot of metrics within your data. You've got all of these data points. And so there's like a whole bunch of questions that you can typically ask, right? I usually start off data visualization projects with a question brainstorming session because there's a whole bunch of questions you'll be able to come up with. You don't need all of them. So if you're able to come up with 10 questions, in all probability, you don't need to answer all 10 of those questions. There are those 2, 3, or 4 important questions, depending on the objective of what you're trying to do, right? Those are those questions that you really want to tackle and you really want to answer using your data. Okay, so you can go into your data and then find answers to those questions, right? Those are those insights that we talk about, right? So again, with insights, there's a whole topic actually on insights that I do for about like an hour and a half or 2 hours. I spend only on insight generation, right? Because that's, like I mentioned, it's the first pillar, right? So that's actually the meat of your data visual. Okay, so analyzing the data to come up with okay. Then we have context. Okay, so context is that frame of reference, right? So context is the frame of reference. I'm not going to talk too much about context right now because I have a couple of slides detailing what context is. And of course, design, we know what design is. By the way, the one thing that I love saying about design to people is that design is not how something looks, right? So that's usually a lot of people confuse this with aesthetics, right? So aesthetics is different, design is different. Design is not how something looks. Design is how something works, right? So if I say that, I had a car that had really low ground clearance, right? Not a very nice car for the country that we live in, right? Because of the roads and the potholes and the speed breakers and stuff. And that's what used to happen to my car. It used to always scrape. The bottom of the car used to always scrape against literally almost every speed breaker. And I used to dread going through potholes, right? Because it used to just make this horrible jarring sound when it used to scrape. Okay. And when people used to ask me, hey, how's the new car doing? I used to say that my response used to be that it's not a very well designed car. So did that mean that the car didn't look good? Well, no. I mean, the car looked really cool. It was a very, very nice looking car. But I used to say that it's not very well designed. We say this about things, right? We say when something doesn't work well, you have this thought in your head, or you tell people, or you talk about it, and you use the word design. You say that, hey, it's not very well designed, right? The person that thought of this or came up with this, well, not a very good job, right? Or the other way around, right? This is like so well designed that it does the job brilliantly. And so that's what design is when applied to the world of data visualization as well. Even something as simple as a chart, which is the centerpiece, let's say, of your slide or your dashboard. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Is it communicating effectively? Is it helping the decision maker? Or is it the other way around? Is it confusing? Is it cluttered? Are there no messages coming out of it? Do people have to stare at it for like a good 3 minutes before they can make sense of it? Right? So that's what good design is in application to data visualization. Right. So let me show you a couple of examples of data storytelling. All right. So this is a story of Yahoo as told as a data story. Right. So in 2002, Yahoo was, of course, a lot bigger than Google. Right. So they were a big company. They wanted to buy Google for $3 billion. Okay. And Google refused. Google said that 3 billion is not enough. You can buy us out, but we want 5 billion. And that deal never happened, as we all know. Google never got acquired by Yahoo. But then in 2008, just about 5 years later, Microsoft comes along and offers to buy Yahoo. And they wanted to purchase Yahoo for $40 billion. But that deal didn't go through either. By 2016, this is what happened to Google. They were worth $730 billion. And the reason I mentioned 2016 there is because that's the same year that Yahoo got sold to Verizon for 4.8 billion, right? So very simple technique for telling a story. This is the